I had seen too many of my colleagues crack under the immense strain of command in the field, not to realize that if I were to continue, I must have ample leisure in which to think, and unbroken sleep. Generals would do well to remember that, even in war, the wisdom of a learned man cometh by opportunity of leisure. That was taken from Field Marshal Viscount William Slim's book, Defeat into Victory. Slim led the British 14th Army in Burma and India in World War II, and he led his men to victory over Japan and was considered by many to be one of the best commanders of World War II. Welcome to Construction Genius, and today we're going to talk about the importance of leisure for busy construction executives.
This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership.
And today what I'm going to do is read the entire description of William Slim's day and comment on that description, and then make an application with regards to how you can balance the demands of your duties with the importance of leisure. So what do I mean by leisure? Leisure is simply time free from the demands of work or duty. And times of leisure can be used for thinking, for relaxing, rejuvenating, socializing. Leisure is not about laziness. Leisure is not about abdication or isolation. It is about being able to marshal your energies and your resources so that you can do the best job possible in the role that you have been given. And this is particularly important for senior leadership, because if you're in senior leadership of a construction company, your decisions have a massive impact upon the organization. And it is important that you have sufficient time for leisure, even throughout your day, in addition to all the hard work that you have to do. And keep in mind, when William Slim is writing this and describing his day, he is in command of an entire army planning a whole year's worth of campaign against the Japanese army. So this is not written when he was in the front lines actually with bullets flying, and it was not in a time of heavy engagement. It was a time of preparation. And so the reason I'm addressing this specifically to executives is because you're not every day in the field, either running a project or with your tools, your tool belt on. You're not there. You're in a higher level. And so the bullets aren't necessarily flying around you every day, but you are making decisions, you are thinking, you are having a huge impact upon your organization. And that's why I think that this description of his day and the application that we're going to make is so important. So there's three things we're going to do. We're going to read the entire description of the day. I'm then going to comment on the description like I mentioned, and then we're going to make an application to you as a leader. So let's go back to the book here. Life at the headquarters followed a daily routine. At 6:30, I got up. At 7, saw the important messages received during the night. At 7:30 to 8, had breakfast with the air commanders and our principal staff officers. I attended the Joint Air and Land Intelligence Conference, known as Morning Prayers, at 8:30, when the events of the past 24 hours were related and commented on, and those for the next described to a considerable audience by British and American Army and Air officers. I then dealt with any urgent matters with my staff officers and saw to the multifarious business that comes to an Army commander for decision. We all met again at lunch and usually talked shop through the meal. I left my office at about 3, read a novel for an hour, had tea, and went for a walk in the cool with one of my staff. Dined at 7:30, talked at the bar of the mess till 9:30, visited my operations room for a final look at the latest reports, and was in bed by 10. I find this fascinating. And so let's take a look at this in a little more detail. The first thing you want to notice as we break down his day is that he had a routine. Good question for you to ask yourself is, do you have a routine in place? A habitual time of rising. So he got up at 6:30. Now, for construction folks, that's probably a little late. Some of you all are getting up at 3:30, 4. You're used to that. But the point is he got up at a regular time. And at 7, he saw the important messages received during the night. Now, what's interesting to me is at 6:30, he got up and he had that little half an hour buffer. He didn't right away get information, but he had that half an hour buffer. Perhaps he was just getting dressed and perhaps having a moment to think and gather his thoughts for the day. But then at 7, the important messages came to him. Okay? And I'd like to say this, you need that buffer. I've spoken about it in other podcasts, but you need that buffer of time that you can use in order to prepare yourself for the challenges that you face every day before you start checking your emails, answering texts, picking up the phone, all those kinds of things. What you notice next, at 7:30 to 8, he breakfasted with the air commanders and our principal staff officers. And what I notice about the way that William Slim ran his day is he left plenty of time for socializing and breaking bread and spending time with the people who reported to him. So think about that for a moment. When did you last break bread with your direct reports and even with your non-direct reports? Because it's in those times of casual or less formal interaction that you can often pick up on what's going on in your organization, what the needs are with particular projects, who's doing well, who's not, bits of gossip or exchange. You can get some insights into people's personal lives, all those kinds of things. And it's interesting, William Slim made a very strong effort to interact with his troops. Military historian Max Hastings says this: in contrast to almost every other outstanding commander of the war, Slim was a disarmingly normal human being, possessed of notable self-knowledge. He was without pretension, devoted to his wife Eileen, their family, and the Indian Army. His calm, robust style of leadership and concern for the interests of his men won the admiration of all who served under him. William Slim was not born into the nobility of Britain. He was born as an ordinary person, but through his military career, he rose to become a Viscount. And the point that I'd like to mention with him here is that he was a fairly ordinary dude in a certain way. He didn't take upon airs. He made a real emphasis of encouraging his troops, spending time with his troops. And you can tell as you look at his daily routine that he put a lot of time aside for those social interactions. So let's go back to the analysis of his schedule here. He says, I attended the Joint Air and Land Intelligence Conference known as Morning Prayers at 8:30, when the events of the past 24 hours were related and commented on, and those for the next described to a considerable audience by British and American Army and Air officers. So you see next he had this daily check-in where you look back and then you look forward, and you notice it's this 24-hour cycle. And that's one of the things that you have to get into a routine in your business as much as possible, is just keeping your finger on the pulse. Now, as the Army commander, he made big decisions, and a lot of the things that were coming his way weren't necessarily decisions that he directly made. They were decisions made by folks that he had delegated to that perhaps weren't under his direct day-to-day control. But nevertheless, information was coming in about what had happened the previous 24 hours, and then decisions were being made for the next 24 hours. So he wasn't isolating himself. He had his finger on the pulse of the operations. Then it goes on here. I then dealt with any urgent matters with my staff officers and saw to the multifarious business that comes to an Army commander for decision. And so you got this idea here after that 8:30 check-in. I'm picturing him from 9:30 to noon, just involved in all kinds of decisions, dealing with the urgent matters. And that's one of the things you have to nail as a leader, obviously, is distinguishing what are urgent and important matters and making sure that you are focusing your decision-making time upon those things. And what you'll notice here is a lot of the decision-making, a lot of the information coming in, this was all taking place during the morning. And I think you you'll find, I know a lot of construction folks find that they do their best work probably between, let's say, 6 a.m. and noon. That's when the best work gets done. That's when the most important decisions are taken. That's when the information comes in from the previous day and the decisions are made for the day coming up. And so make sure that you're setting aside that time from, let's say, 9:30 to noon for those urgent and important decisions that you have to take as a leader. Then it goes on here. We all met again at lunch, usually talk shop through the meal. And again, you see him here taking another opportunity to break bread with his staff. And you can just imagine that depending upon who's at the headquarters, he's breaking bread with different people at different times. And that's something that you really want to emphasize. If you find someone in the hall of your office who's usually out in the field, why don't you grab that person and say, hey, come and have lunch with me. And make sure that you, again, are spending time in casual social situations, interacting with the folks that you work with. Okay? Now, he then said, I left my office at about 3. So you figure that he probably had lunch between noon and 1. And then I just picture him with this block of 2 hours between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock. And that's very much a block of time that you should be able to take in your day, perhaps for projects that you're working on, to work on stuff that's important but not urgent. Perhaps you pick up the phone and call a key client or a key project partner and just touch base with them. Perhaps you lay aside time for an actual face-to-face visit with one of your clients. Perhaps you read up on new technologies, get familiar with the regulations that are coming down the pipe from the government, check out market trends. What I wouldn't do is I wouldn't necessarily be checking all the news about construction first thing in the morning. I would save that for the afternoon, because then you can perhaps give a little more thought to it and perhaps have an idea of who you might want to delegate article to read as you take in news from the various sources that you have with your finger on the pulse of the construction industry. So block out that 2-hour time for important but not urgent stuff. The morning is for urgent and important. The afternoon is for important but not necessarily urgent things. Then he goes on and he says here, he read a novel for an hour. So I just picture him at 3 o'clock, stopping, perhaps going back to where he lived and picking up a book right in the middle of the day at 3 o'clock. Something entirely out of the realm of war planning and commanding. He did something that was the definition of leisure, reading a novel. Okay, so what can you do perhaps in the middle of the day to take a little break and to refresh and reset your mind? Perhaps you read sports or something like that. You probably want to avoid news and social media that might get your temperature up. But the fact is that he took a break, and this guy was commanding an entire army. He took a break for an hour just to read a book in the middle of the day. And then he had tea. Now, typically in English time, tea is around 4 o'clock. You have tea from 4 to 5 o'clock. It's a little sort of mid-afternoon snack with a nice pot of tea. And then he went for a walk in the cool with one of my staff. So what you notice, he has time for reading that novel where he's not thinking about business, so to speak. He has another break for tea. And then he goes for a walk with one of his staff. And this is where this exercise piece comes in. And I want to encourage you, when it comes to emphasizing this idea of leisure, when you're doing something other than work, do things like read, do things like socialize, exercise. And there's a real wisdom I find. I know I found this particularly in the last few years, to taking a walk. And when I take a walk, I leave behind many times my cell phone. Perhaps I'm listening to an audio book, but I'm not checking my messages. I'm not on the phone having a conversation. I'm either going without my phone or I'm listening to an audio book as I go on my walks. And that really helps to reset my mind and to refresh me throughout the day. And so from 5 to 7, it seems like he was getting some kind of exercise in. And then he dined at 7:30, okay? And then that dinner went on, it seems like, for about 2 hours. And then he talked at the bar of the mess till 9:30. Interesting. So from 7:30 to 9:30, he was eating and socializing again. I really want to make this emphasis is that he spent a lot of time interacting with his men. interacting with the folks who he was working with on a daily basis. And obviously, you may not be able to have dinner with your people that you work with every day. I'm not suggesting that necessarily. But again, the point that I'm making from looking at his schedule here is he spent a lot of time interacting with his folks, but he also spent time by himself. And I think that's a critical balance that we need to get as leaders. There's a time to be alone, and then there's a time to be with others. And make sure in that time that you're alone to maximize the impact of that so that you can maximize your impact when you're with your folks. And then the final thing he did, and it says here, he visited his operations room for a final look at the latest reports. And then he was in bed by 10 o'clock. I thought that was interesting too. So he finished dinner, went to look at the operations room for some of the latest reports. And I could just imagine that as he was sleeping, it gave his subconscious time to work on that information so that when he woke up in the morning, he was ready for another vigorous session of taking those urgent and important decisions. But you notice he was in bed by 10, nice and early, and he was able to get 8.5 hours sleep. And it says here in the book, if between then, that is 10 o'clock, and 6:30, when my faithful orderly aroused me, anyone disturbed me for anything short of a real crisis, he did so at his peril. So you notice that he was spending a lot of time socializing with his folks throughout the day, interacting with them, working with them, but then his sleep time was precious. And unless there was a real crisis, he was not to be disturbed. Now, as you're listening to this recollection of William Slim's schedule, you may be saying, you know, Eric, I'm not really in that position. I'm not a general in my organization. Fair enough. But how about you project yourself into the future? Let's say you have an ambition to lead a construction company. How can you delegate more effectively to free up more time during the day for this leisure, for time free from the demands of work or duty so that you can be thinking and relaxing and rejuvenating? What are you doing that is distracting you or interrupting you throughout the day from focusing on those urgent and important tasks? Where might you be able to improve your discipline in terms of time blocking so that you can focus on those things that are important but not urgent? And then you might say, you know, Eric, what if we're super busy? Think about the COVID-19 crisis that hit in March 2020. There was no time for leisure at that point, especially if you're the leader of the organization. You're getting all of this new information about the safety regulations and, you know, what job site's going to be open, what's going to be shut down. You probably ramped up your energy and your effort at that point quite considerably. And I think it's interesting that William Slim allows for this. And I want to read you one more quote from the book just so you get an idea of how he viewed times of emergency. Generals who are terribly busy all day and half the night, who fuss around posting platoons and writing march tables, wear out not only their subordinates but themselves. Nor have they, when the real emergency comes, the reserve of vigor that will enable them for days, if necessary, to do with little rest or sleep. You see, William Slim was an experienced combat commander. He was wounded 3 times during his experience in World War I and World War II. But he understood that having a routine during times of non-emergency helped to build up those reserves of vigor that were necessary to be expended in times of emergency. So don't fuss around when it's not necessary. Don't get involved in stuff that other people should be doing. Get better at delegation and get better at trusting others so that you're not just draining yourself all of the time, running at a high pressure, high stress level that really does not give you the opportunity to be strengthened internally and prepared for those real emergencies like a COVID-19 crisis where you do have to work 60, 70 hours a week and take high pressure decisions. Let's just finish up here with some next steps that you can take. And I'm going to give you 7 next steps. Number 1, commit to a routine. Number 2, socialize while eating. Number 3, in the morning, take on your urgent and important decisions between, let's say, 6 and noon. Number 4, block time for things that are important but not urgent in the afternoon. Number 5, commit to recreation. William Slim read a novel. Perhaps you can check out the sports page or do something other than work to give your mind an opportunity to reset throughout the day. Number 6, physical exercise. We talk about that quite a bit on the podcast. And number 7, sleeping. William Slim got 8.5 hours sleep. How much sleep do you need a night? Make sure that you get it. Remember, what is leisure? Leisure is time free from the demands of work and duty. And as we can see from William Slim's example, he took time for leisure every day. How can you incorporate more leisure time so that in the time of working, you can be more effective? My name is Eric Anderton. Hope you found the podcast today helpful. Feel free to share it with other folks and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a rating and a review. And contact me, of course, on my website, ericanderton.com, or on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, if you have any feedback, happy to help you in any way that I can. Thanks again for listening to Construction Genius today.
This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership.